It's go time.
Which coach is in trouble as we start this 2024 CFL season? Welcome everyone to Third Down Gamble. I'm Don Charbon along with Heath Graham. Interestingly, we've got three teams at the bottom of the league with the exact same record. Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Hamilton are all 0-3 to start this season. When you look across that landscape, is there A, a team that's in big trouble, B, a coach that's in big trouble, or C, do you not worry yet?
I think all three teams are in a bit of trouble if you look at the standings and where they have to get into a playoff spot. And as far as the coaches in trouble, Chris Jones has to be on the hot seat now. He's not had success in his return to Edmonton. This is his third season at the helm with the Elks this time around, and the results just aren't there. You can look at Winnipeg 0-3 this year. Surprising, but it's not like Mike O'Shea and his crew have forgotten how to coach. There are a couple of new coordinators in defensive coordinator and special teams this year, but the brain trust, they were promoted from within. They have the best opportunity, I would say, of the three to turn things around right now. Yes, they've got some work to do, and with the loss against the Lions and the Riders winning once again, it's a long climb to try to overtake those two teams to get into first place in the West. That'll be their biggest challenge. Hamilton, you've got a new head coach in Scott Milanovic. Bo Levi Mitchell looks healthier than he has been in the last couple of years. There is some concern there, especially with that offense. The receiving core, especially Tim White, is struggling. If I was to say which coach is in the most jeopardy right now, I would have to say Chris Jones in Edmonton.
Let's really dive into that. You are right about Tim White. He's had a really rocky start to the season in Hamilton. The Hamilton receiving core is actually letting down Bo Levi Mitchell. Granted, he threw 3 interceptions in the game against Saskatchewan. We'll get into that. 2 of those were deflected balls. We don't know if a receiver was off the route or if Bo was missing him. In Edmonton, is there any way that you consider what happened in Toronto a moral victory? The Elks pushed the Argonauts as far as possible in that football game and only lose on the only field goal of the game on its final play.
I guess you can look at it as a moral victory if you want. Yes, they did play a very good Toronto Argonauts team right down to the wire, but a loss is still a loss. If you ask Elks fans when they were enduring that 22-game home losing streak, how many moral victories were in there? Looking back on it right now, they're probably not going to remember very many. There were some games where they gave teams a fight, but a loss was a loss at the end of the day. As I said, the record of the Edmonton Elks in this iteration of Chris Jones's tenure has not been good. Whether it's a 1-point loss or a 15-point loss, those are the same in that win-loss column, and it has to take its toll.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think you're on point. The problem that I have with that sort of sentimentality is that if a team is starting to improve, and we're seeing that with the Elks, impatience starts to run in if you don't see W's. And I know it's a results-driven universe in which we live. It was maybe less so when we were kids. Let's play this out just as a thought experiment. What if that was the best that Edmonton could play? Let's pretend that the Elks gave everything they got in their system to the Argonauts, pushed them as far as they could, and it still wasn't enough to win a football game. Is that ever on a management's table? Let's assess this, that maybe that's the best we can be, and that's it. We just saw it, and still it's not good enough. Or do you turn it right around and say, that's the beginning of where we can be, and that was a sign of what we can be?
The problem I have with that is Chris Jones has his fingers all over this team as a supposed defensive specialist as well as the general manager. The offense put up over 30 points. McLeod Bethel Thompson has proven that he can move the ball. We knew this coming in, that he was a stabilizing quarterback that was going to put up some big yards. My take on this then is, okay, the offense is capable of scoring some points. What are you doing about the defense? And that has to fall squarely on the coach at this point. The defense simply is not good enough. And we can dig into some other teams as well. And right now, I would say that Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense is not good enough either. And they've had a lot of turnover. But we're focusing on the Elks right now. And if this is Chris Jones's area of expertise, it's a failing grade for him.
I've had it on good authority, although I will stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, that Chris Jones, when he signed his contract, it was a series of 4 one-year deals. That would give the Elks management an out, that if they do see the need to get rid of him in this season, that they're only paying him till the end of the season. BC is the next opponent. A bye follows. What does Edmonton have to do in BC for Chris Jones to keep his job? It's long odds to win in a stadium where the previous season they could barely score a point.
Another 3-point loss, maybe, if it's a defensive game where they lose 21-17, 21-18, something like that, and the defense has come up with some big plays, perhaps. If they get blown out of the water by Vernon Adams Jr., and that offense and BC runs up the score, I think it's farewell to Chris Jones over that bye week.
Does any of this apply to Scott Milanovich, who's 0-3 with the Tiger Cats, Mike O'Shea, who's 0-3 with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers? To be fair to Milanovich, first season. Mike O'Shea, though, has been there quite a while. Blue Bombers, if they want to make a change, but would that be an irrational response?
In both those cases, I think it would be irrational based on the track record. As you mentioned, Milanovich is now 3 games in as head coach of the Tiger Cats. That's too early to make a change. Again, you have to look at where they're falling down, and at this point, it's the receiving core dropping balls. Milanovich can't help them catch it. He can come up with plays and schemes to get the ball thrown towards them. It's up to those receivers to make the play. As I said earlier, Mike O'Shea hasn't forgotten how to coach football. I think it would be a foolish move for the Bombers at this point to pull the plug. I've talked for several years about the success of the Blue Bombers, and what built them was starting with the offensive and defensive lines and building a team out from there. They, over the last 4 seasons, have had arguably the best lines on both sides of the ball in the league, or certainly the top 2 or 3 offensive and defensive lines in the league. They don't have that anymore. Jackson Jeffcoat was a huge loss this year. We have seen Stove Richardson come and go as well on that defensive line. The offensive line now without Jamarcus Hardrick, there's a few other moves over the last couple of seasons as well. They are both shadows of what they were in 2022, and you're seeing that struggle for Winnipeg right now.
In many ways, a professional football team is akin to a college football team. You don't get to keep these people forever. In college, it's a 4-year cycle or a 5-year cycle in Canada. In the Canadian Football League, the life expectancy of a career is roughly 3 to 3.5 years. So typically you're having massive turnover regardless. Mike O'Shea has not forgotten how to coach. His style may not be the best for this type of situation, but then it may be the best for this situation. Why would it be the best? Because he's a calming influence. Why wouldn't it be the best? Because he may not light a fire. You take what you get with what you've got. And O'Shea, who's no stranger to having struggles as a head coach, go back to his early days, he made it through all that and brought them Grey Cups. Is the patience needed there with Winnipeg management to wait this out, given that there's a Grey Cup in Winnipeg the following year?
I would agree with that. I think it's a situation right now. He started, I believe, 4-14 his first year as head coach of the Bombers and brought them up from there. This is maybe a bit of a reset for Winnipeg. They've got some aging veterans. They've had some players leave to free agency and retirement. And now the injury bug is creeping into that receiving core and some other spots on the field as well. So it's an opportunity or a crisis for Winnipeg right now, but it's something that they need to trust in what they have and look to where improvement is possible.
The Blue Bombers, with Dalton Schoen out, Brady Oliveira out, Kenny Lawler out, are giving up probably a sixth of their salary cap right now to the injured list. Let's look at the teams that are at the top. We've got 3 teams still undefeated. We've got the Montreal Alouettes, 3-0, won 2 in a row on the road to start the season. In the West, we've got the Toronto Argonauts, who've won both their home games. We have the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who for the first time in their franchise history won 2 games on the road to start the season and now have followed up with a 3-0 start. I think the last time they were that strong at the beginning was 2014.
Very impressive. I think most surprising, given their performance over the last couple of seasons, would have to be the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Now, they have started strong over the last couple of seasons as well, and it was their inability to finish that hurt them. But I think having a rookie head coach in Corey Mace, this comes as a little bit of a surprise that they're 3-0. They have played quite well. The only concern to me observing this team right now is the lack of discipline, and penalties will come to hurt them at some point. Corey Mace has talked of that and wanted to have a better disciplined team. We haven't seen that on the field yet. Toronto Argonauts, I guess given that Cameron Dukes is the starting quarterback and not Chad Kelly, their 2-0 start is a little bit of a surprise. They have looked very strong on both sides of the football. And Montreal, you can see now why and how they won that Grey Cup last year. They are a really solid team that added some missing pieces and really came together as a cohesive unit. And they've continued, even with Austin Mack moving south of the border, you've now got Tyson Philpott as a star receiver on that Montreal offense. And Cody Fajardo is playing some of the best football of his career.
They're missing Cole Speaker, another one of their deep threats. Walter Fletcher has been a revelation. The Alouettes are doing it. Defense is leading the way, as is the Saskatchewan Roughriders defense. Toronto Argonauts, their defense is still in flux. They've got 2 essentially rookie corners. Edmonton cooked them a few times, but in the second half they had figured it out. That's what you take with rookies. There's going to be mistakes, but so long as they learn from those mistakes, and if they do it within the game, that's really impressive. Cameron Dukes, though, wow, did he ever look stalwart? Didn't matter what the situation was against Edmonton. He was calm, took that team back and forth down the field. Toronto, they're still going to be a beast in the East, and we've got a great game coming up with them in Montreal, which is just going to be a real telltale sign. Overall, if you look at the 3, you say Saskatchewan probably surprises you the most. I would think Toronto does me. Saskatchewan in the last 3 years has started strong, regardless of who the coach was, and have managed to fumble it thereafter. Now, Corey Mace, different regime. We'll see what happens. Toronto, everything that they went through in that offseason, especially in the last 3 months prior to the first game with Chad Kelly, it was just distraction central. If a team could have been more vilified, I don't know how they could have been, but they've managed to withstand. And I give credit to Ryan Dinwiddie to staying focused and staying on the course. He has said repeatedly, home is where we dominate. We do not lose here, and the Argos aren't. They're doing what they need to do to win there.
Now, the fun thing with the CFL is we talk about all these great things and these undefeated teams and the bad things for the winless teams. Things can turn around very quickly. One of the common threads in Winnipeg right now is a lot of talk about a BC Lions team that once started 0-5, finished the season 11-7, and won a Grey Cup. So it's an area of concern, but maybe not an area of panic. But these wins need to start turning around. And once they do, a team can go from 0-3 to 3-3 with a really solid run and be right back in the mix.
There has been much ado about the chip in the football in terms of kickers in the Canadian Football League. The CFL, for its part, did allow teams to have the option to not use the footballs when field goals were in the offing, giving the teams the prerogative. But in the moments prior to that decision, 4 of the 9 kickers in the CFL went off about it. Some more so, some less so. All 4 have been fined to varying degrees for violating the CFL's social media policy. Fair, unfair? What do you think?
So to recap, if I've got this right, we've got Brett Lothar in Saskatchewan, Sergio Castillo in Winnipeg, Sean White in BC, and Lewis Ward in Ottawa were the 4 that have been fined. Those are 4 very good kickers. This, in my opinion, is a bad look for the league to issue those fines. There was some talk in preseason about problems with this ball. The CFL didn't take action until after game 1 of the regular season, where we saw especially Sergio Castillo struggle and was vocal about it. And these fines seem a little bit unnecessary at this point, considering that they did make this change.
I'm going to take the exact opposite position. The CFL had to do this. Look, there is a way and a structure that if you're upset about something that the league is doing, that you follow it. Brett Lothar, who's the vice president of the CFL Players Association, should know this better than anyone, that if you have an issue with the league, there are channels by which you follow to raise those concerns. Going out to the media, going on Twitter, are not the ways to do so. That's why they were fined. Not the fact that they were upset. They can be upset. But that they went after the league and really, by saying what they said, and I don't agree with them doing that in the first place. If you've got an issue with your employer, you don't go to Twitter and start blasting them.
The concerns were raised in the preseason, and the CFL did nothing until after game 1 of the regular season. These kickers are worried about their jobs, and if the product that they are asked to use is inferior and affects their job performance, absolutely they should speak out. If they're not getting assurance from the CFL itself that this situation is being addressed, and all of those kickers went out and went 1 for 4, 1 for 5, teams are going to start bringing in competition for these guys. These kickers know how to do their job properly. They were given an inferior product that did not allow them to do it properly. They were vocal about it, and rightfully so. The fact they used social media to get that message across was the way that they were going to be heard, because the CFL did not seem to be taking action.
You have channels, you have avenues to do this properly. You can't light up the CFL every time you're upset over something. The CFL did do testing. Now, maybe they got it wrong. They owned up to it. They saw what was happening in the football game, and they said, okay, we'll pull back. What is the problem there? Nothing. The CFL tried something, it didn't work. We all try something in life, and whether it works or not, we don't find out until the event has occurred. Granted, the USFL had tried it, and it didn't work for them. It's worth the ask. They got the question out there. The kickers were obviously upset, and maybe were being impacted by it. We don't know for sure. We don't know if that was a head game or it was an actual mechanical issue that was going on. Regardless, they got what they wanted, but to get there, they went about it the wrong way. And I have no problem with the CFL taking a stand and saying, look, you want to chirp us? You do it behind closed doors. You don't go to TSN, you don't go to the Edmonton Sun, you don't go to the Vancouver Province and say, look, I hate this and these guys should have known better and blah, blah, blah. Wrong. That's not the way you conduct business.
So Brett Lothar was below average in training camp, actually had a pretty poor camp by his standards. If he goes out in game 1 and completely misses field goals and points after, all of a sudden they're bringing in two new kickers into practice to compete for that job. Brett Lothar goes about it the wrong way because he's upset with the product that was brought to him. As the CFLPA vice president, he knew what he was doing. He was protecting the players, and the fact that the CFL fined him and these other kickers for this is over the top.
If you bring in other kickers and they have the exact same problem, guess what? Brett Lothar, Sean White, you're not losing your job because they're not making any more than you. If it was the football and if it was the chip inside the football, nobody's going to do any better than what they did unless they figured out somehow how to use it to their advantage, which I don't think was going to happen. Bottom line is, you have concerns. Make your concerns known through the proper channels. They have every opportunity to raise them through what's available to them. They didn't. They got their knuckles wrapped. Even Castillo, when he said, I'm going to get fined for this, he knew what he was doing. This was not off the cuff. No, this was a calculated risk he took. He knew what was going to happen, and he got fined. And I imagine the rest of them knew what they were doing, but they were going to take the fine anyway. Saying the CFL is looking bad for this, wrong answer. They took the chance. They knew what the consequences were. They got the consequences.
Hi, I'm Darren Flutie, and you're listening to the Third Down Gamble Podcast.
We open with, oh my goodness, did we not understand what was about to happen in Montreal? Ottawa, who I had stated on the show, had won 3 of the last 6 games that they had played in Montreal and had given Montreal a rough ride most of the time, get destroyed by the Alouettes, 47-21. Montreal dominates from the word go. Turnovers, of course, hurt the Red Blacks, but Montreal just were relentless.
They were, as I said earlier, Cody Fajardo's playing some of the best football of his career. 28 for 35, 393 yards, and 3 touchdowns. A great night for him. That Montreal offense, we saw both Keon Julian Grant and Tyson Philpott over 100 yards receiving. Reggie White Jr. back from injury, had a solid night. Just across the board, those Montreal receivers. 8 different players caught a ball for the Montreal Alouettes on offense. Defense, you just go back to Tyrese Beverette with an interception. Just a relentless defense as well. An all-around great performance by the Alouettes. David Cote goes 4 for 4 on field goals. You can't find a weakness for Montreal in that game against Ottawa. It was a dismantling. And the score, frankly, probably flatters Ottawa a little bit given what we saw. Drew Brown, 292 yards and a touchdown and 1 interception. Again, his second start with Ottawa. He hasn't had a lot of starts in general in the CFL. Continuing to develop and looks to be starter quarterback quality, but just an all-out domination by Montreal.
Tyson Philpott, his breakout game came in the Grey Cup, making that catch. And from that moment, after winning that game, he has just launched forward. 8 receptions, 150 yards in this football game. Those are amazing stats. But he wasn't the only one. Keon Julian Grant, also 8 receptions, 116 yards. Like, stats were piling up everywhere. It's the first time ever that Drew Brown has been intercepted in a regular season game. So that streak is over. The Ottawa Red Blacks, who many had thought, myself included, that after they beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, were going to provide some competition for Montreal, almost looked like they thought the game was on Friday, not Thursday. They came out flat. They came out disorganized. Tommy Condell was wed to this idea that screen passes were going to beat the Alouettes, and the Alouettes just chewed them up. It wasn't until the third quarter that Condell started to get the offense to throw the ball down the field. Friday night, the big one in the West, the BC Lions and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Who's going to have bragging rights after this one? Let's give a credit here to Vernon Adams Jr. With the game on the line, he steps up and throws a deep pass to Alexander Hollins, and the BC Lions pull away and get out of Winnipeg with a 26-24 win. Looking deeper into Vernon Adams Jr. performance, William Stanback, yes, he had a great game, but look at Alexander Hollins. 7 receptions on 8 targets, 215 yards, and of course that big one at the end of the game for 71 yards. He put a stamp on this game where he alone had over half of the receiving yards for the team.
Impressive stuff from Vernon Adams. Almost 400 yards passing, 398 total with 2 touchdowns. Great night. Interesting stat, in the 3 losses, Zach Collaros has yet to throw a touchdown pass. Now, he did get them down to scoring range several times, and we saw Chris Drevler run in for 3 touchdowns. So it's a bit of an anomaly that those touchdown passes haven't occurred yet. The biggest concern for Winnipeg was their inability to get the Lions offense off the field when they needed to. And that Lions offense stepped up late in the game and just continued to move the yardsticks, gain yardage, gain first downs, and didn't allow the Bombers to come back in this one.
I'm not a big fan of quarterback stats such as touchdown passes thrown. I want to know what that offense is doing with that quarterback. It's not the quarterback's fault that they throw the ball to Wolotarski and he gets tackled at the 2. Well, guess what? Strevler's going to get the stat. That's not Collaros' fault. That stat to me is overplayed. More important to me is, did you lead your team to touchdowns? When you got into the red zone, did you score? And if you did, then I want you as my quarterback. I don't care how you scored. I just want to know that you scored. Collaros looked better in this football game. Dalton Schoen doesn't finish the game and has to be carried to the locker room after the game. He's on the 6th game now. The attrition for the Bombers continues. Saturday night in Toronto. The Toronto Argonauts and the Edmonton Elks show you why Canadian football is so amazing. Each team scores 5 touchdowns, but it's a field goal at the last possible second from Liram Hairolahu, and the Toronto Argonauts leave the stadium with a 39-36 win over the Elks in a game that you just package and you send out as highlights everywhere.
This one was great CFL football. We saw 100-yard rushing from Kadeem Carey, 19 carries for 104 yards. We saw McLeod Bethel-Thompson over 300 yards passing and 4 touchdowns. A little bit of everything in this one. All you could really ask for. We talked about Cameron Dukes earlier. Just a solid night. 18 for 21 for 214 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's playing within himself. He's not trying to do too much. He is allowing this team around him to seal the victory. When a young quarterback gets thrust into these starting roles, 2 things can happen. 1, they try to do too much and the turnovers start to creep up. Or 2, and I think Ryan Dinwiddie deserves a lot of credit for this as well, you allow that quarterback to play safe. 18 completions for 214 yards is not huge yards per completion numbers, but they're solid. And that's what they needed from Cameron Dukes. He did a little bit with his legs as well, looking good running the ball. A real solid night for him, and this puts them in really good shape so far this season. And you look at the possibility of Chad Kelly coming back. Is he going to be the starter, or does Cameron Dukes steal that job away from him?
All depends on where the Argos are at that moment. Edmonton couldn't stop the run. 186 yards rushing, 6.4 yards per attempt allowed by the Elks defense. That's what killed them in this football game. And then, of course, the contacting the kicker call late in the game, when it looked as though Edmonton would have the ball and the chance to win, Joel DeBlanco slides into Justin Haggerty's leg, makes enough contact that they have to call the foul. Toronto moves the ball forward. Haggerty then makes a brilliant punt that pins the Elks deep. They can't get out of the shadow of their goalpost. They punt back, and Toronto then is set up to go down the field and play for the winning field goal. It's a shame that the crowd was small because Toronto missed out on a great game. Huge win. The Alouettes now are in the offing for Toronto. The 2 undefeated teams in the East, which we had last week. We had 2 undefeated teams in the East facing off again this week. We'll have it again. It's just a lot of fun when you've got this type of game on a Saturday night. You can't leave the television until the final play is over.
We've been really lucky this year, or really blessed this year with a lot of close games. There's been a couple of blowouts, but you look at both the Winnipeg BC game and this one coming right down to the wire and last minute field goals, 2-point difference in win and loss. Really entertaining.
We finish up Sunday night with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Since about 2003, the Roughriders and the Tiger Cats have had 4 back-to-back series that have been swept. They've all been swept by the Saskatchewan Roughriders, ironically. Roughriders win this one 36-20 in a game where Lawrence Woods sets the Tiger Cats back on the opening kickoff when he fumbles it deep in his own zone.
Dream start for the Roughriders, getting the ball on a fumbled kick return in great field position. They turned that into 7 points. They were up 17-0 by the end of the first quarter. You can't draw it up any better than that. Really, they were up 14-0 before a lot of fans made their way to their seats. It was a dream start.
Bo Levi Mitchell is picked 3 times. 2 balls are deflected in that fourth quarter on successive drives. Jameer Thurman takes one of them back to the house for a touchdown for Saskatchewan to really salt the game away. The turning point, you could argue, in this football game would come in the third quarter, where Hamilton has pressed the ball down inside the Saskatchewan 15. They're trailing 18-7 at this moment. Mitchell fakes like he's going to hand the ball off. He moves to his left, and I'm not sure what he was doing. Charbel Debire happens to bring his arm across, pop the ball out of his hands, and it's recovered by Jameer Thurman, who had a stellar night with turnovers, and the Rough Riders get out of a huge situation. From that moment on, it seemed like the Ticats went backwards.
They did, and a couple of other standouts on that offense for the Rough Riders. We talked about A.J. Ouellette getting a little bit of a slow start carrying the ball. He had 20 carries for 98 yards this week, as well as 4 for 4 on targets for four receptions and another 47 yards. The Riders are doing a great job of getting him involved in that offense. The offensive line as a whole for Saskatchewan is much improved over where they were the previous 2 seasons as well, giving Trevor Harris time to find receivers. It was a solid night for them, and that defense by the Riders, holding the Ticats to 20 points, causing turnovers, forcing fumbles. They did a lot of special things on defense as well.
For Saskatchewan, some concern coming out of the second quarter. Trevor Harris is hit after he releases a ball to Ouellette. On the play, the tackle takes Harris to ground. He falls on that left knee that he had damaged so severely last year against the Calgary Stampeders. He gets up hobbling, goes into the locker room, is late coming back out in the third quarter. He presses the medical staff to let him back in the game, and the coaching staff and the medical staff agree. It ain't happening. The Riders at that time were ahead. There was no need, and it was an opportunity to see what Shea Patterson can do. Now, Patterson didn't have a great time of it.
He didn't, and that's where the Riders went into their running game a little bit deeper as well, relying on A.J. Ouellette to carry the ball. The great thing for the Riders is they've got some time to rest Trevor Harris here as well. Hopefully it wasn't a serious injury. It looked like he was ready to get back into the game. That bodes well for the Riders. We saw what happened last year when Trevor Harris went down with injury. The team did struggle.
To be fair to Hamilton, though, the first touchdown that the Riders get is immediately after the fumble on the kickoff. The Riders do have a drive that sets up another touchdown, but after that, the Riders' offense kind of goes quiet, and it only scored 1 point in the second quarter just prior to Harris being injured. If Bo doesn't fumble that football in the third quarter and the Ticats go in to score as expected, what a difference it could be. Now, Scott Milanovic again is just bewildered as to why his team is making these self-destructive mistakes. The Hamilton Tiger Cats are struggling to get on the same page.
Third down.
As we move into week 4, lots of huge matchups in the Canadian Football League. Before we get there, let's give a shout out to Oiler Girl, who's now leading the pack in our third down gamble pool. First off, we have a huge Thursday night contest. I'll be honest, this one's going to be sort of a do or die game in one sense, because Chris Jones right now is under the absolute most pressure that he can feel going into BC to take on the BC Lions. The Lions, who have gone in and beat the Blue Bombers, is there any chance that they could be sort of down because that was such an emotional win in Winnipeg? The Lions, 6.5-point favorites.
Well, here's where you look at your supposed moral victory of the Edmonton Elks almost beating Toronto in Toronto last week. Can they get close to the BC Lions a second week in a row? I do believe the Lions are going to win this one outright. And given what we've seen from Vernon Adams and that BC Lions offense, I believe they do win and cover the spread in this one. Could be a high-scoring affair, given what we've seen with McLeod Bethel-Thompson and his ability to put some points on the board for the Elks. There could be a lot of points scored in this one. I like BC to pull away a little bit at the end and believe that they cover.
June 17th of 2023, the Elks went into town and got beat 22-0 by the BC Lions. The two teams would meet a few weeks later in Edmonton, and the Elks again were shut out by the Lions on July 29th, 27-0. That's almost unheard of, that a team could be shut out twice by the same opponent. With McLeod Bethel-Thompson, the offense is going to be stronger. We saw that.
And it looks like they are headed in that right direction, which can only be a good thing for the Edmonton Elks. I believe there is a place for Trey Ford in this offense as well. It might be an opportunity right now to see what each of them can do. They bring some different components to their game, and it might not be bad to get Trey Ford in for a series or two to change things up and give that offense a bit of a different look. That could be a bit of a challenge for the BC Lions. If they're game planning for McLeod Bethel-Thompson, all of a sudden you've got Trey Ford running all over the field. That can wreak some havoc.
BC focused in this year on Alexander Hollins and Justin McInnes to be their go-to guys. Given that the numbers that Vernon Adams Jr. has been able to post in his first 3 games, if and when Keon Hatcher can join the crowd, watch out. This aerial circus could go beyond what they're doing now. The Lions' defense has been really good, considering that Matthew Betts is not there. But the defensive line, although they're not getting a lot of sacks, are keeping the running game of their opponents in check and keeping quarterbacks in check. Does 6.5 do it for this football game, given what we saw Edmonton and Toronto, where the Elks pushed the Argos to the bitter end? Even though it's a shorter week for Edmonton, they have to make the trek from Toronto back to Vancouver to play this football game. It's going to be later at night for Edmonton. Even with all of that, I thought that I saw a spark with the Elks. Chris Jones is supposed to be a defensive maverick. His defense was shredded by the Argonauts' running game. If he doesn't get that sorted out, then William Stanback is going to have a field day and the Lions will walk. I think Edmonton, for once, is going to give BC a game in BC. I don't know they'll win it, but I'm leaning towards Edmonton beating the cover. Friday night in Toronto, the Montreal Alouettes go to play the Toronto Argonauts in the battle of unbeatens, the battle for first place in the East. Alouettes haven't lost a game on the road this year. They have won 10 straight, looking to make it 11. Toronto would love to be the team that stops that streak. Can Montreal do it in Toronto? Can they extend the streak in Toronto? They are favored by 3.5.
It shows that the bookmakers have a lot of confidence in Montreal as well to give them that big of a spread on the road against an unbeaten team, not showing a lot of respect for the Toronto Argonauts. This is a big match between that Toronto defense and Montreal's offense and what they've shown so far this year. Montreal will be a big test for Cameron Dukes at quarterback as well. This is going to be an opportunity for him to show whether he's a true starter and can hang on to that starting job later on in the season. I'm giving the nod to the Alouettes on the road in this one from what we've seen so far this season. I believe that they do keep Toronto's offense in check and pull away a little bit. It's not going to be a blowout, but I do think it's Montreal by a touchdown in this one.
Montreal's offense versus Toronto's defense, although I will give the nod to Montreal's offense. On the flip side, Toronto's offense against Montreal's defense is going to make Cam Duke's day miserable. This could be his real litmus test in terms of who he is as a quarterback. I'm liking the Alouettes on the road with the spread. On Saturday night, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers take their act on the road to go to Calgary to play the Stampeders, both teams coming off losses. Calgary and BC, Winnipeg at home to BC. Calgary, of course, had the bye last week. Does that help them at all against the Blue Bombers, who are favored by 2.5?
Teams coming off a bye generally do quite well in the CFL. These early season buys are a tough one because it seems like you hardly get into the flow of it and you've got a bye. Winnipeg has been in the last couple of games with a chance to win late and haven't been able to close it out. The concern for Winnipeg right now is that beat up offense. 2 key receivers and a running back hurting and gone possibly for big chunks of this season. It's an opportunity for some rookie receivers to step up and see if they can make a difference. Calgary, Jake Maier has looked a lot better this year than he did last year, which has to give them a little bit of hope as well. That linebacking core for Calgary is a concern, especially with the interior of Winnipeg's offensive line seeming to struggle right now to protect Zach Collaros. This is a tough one. I think I'm going to lean towards Calgary beating the spread. I don't know that they'll necessarily win outright. They very well could. I think this one's going to be a close game, and it could come down to a last-second kick from either Castillo or Rene Paredes.
If James Vaughters, Julian Hauser, Mike Rose get into Zach Collaros' grill, the Blue Bombers are in for a long night. Winnipeg's in trouble. Injuries have played havoc with them, and their talent level just isn't what it was the last couple of years. I believe they're starting 8 rookies or second-year players on that team, something they haven't done in quite a while. I like Calgary at home to beat the spread on this one, and maybe even win the football game. The final game, interesting for different reasons. We've got the 0-3 Hamilton Tiger Cats going against the 1-1 Ottawa Red Blacks. For Ottawa, with the doors blown off of them last week by the Montreal Alouettes, Hamilton, again, does it to themselves. You think back to the 5 turnovers against Saskatchewan last week. You can't keep doing things that hamstring your ability to succeed. This is where I think their team has struggled the most, is that they've really stopped themselves. If the receivers catch, if they hang on to the football, if you're a running back or a kick returner, Hamilton has enough to be competitive. You can't make those kind of mistakes.
There's a couple of really interesting things to watch in this game. One is, how does Drew Brown bounce back? He looked really good in week 1 against Winnipeg, threw some interceptions, had some turnovers in this last game against a very stalwart Montreal defense. The other thing to watch is, how does Tim White perform on that Hamilton offense? Does he make those catches he's been struggling to make early in the season? If he has a drop early in this game, what happens to his psyche? The 3 interceptions from Bo Levi Mitchell last week are a concern. Interestingly enough, Dane Evans had similar things happen to him a couple of years ago in Hamilton, where he was hitting receivers in the hands, the balls were popping up and being picked off, and we saw a couple of those interceptions. The same thing happened to Bo Levi. I'm not sure how to call this game. It's either Drew Brown performs and the Red Blacks pull away, or Hamilton gets that offense back on track and they pull away. 3.5 points, it's not going to be a close to covering or beating the spread. One team is either going to cover by a lot, or the other team is going to beat it by a lot. And right now, I'm leaning towards the Hamilton Tiger Cats righting the ship and pulling this one off.
This one is so hard to figure out. Is Ottawa what we saw against Winnipeg, or is Ottawa what we saw against Montreal? Where is Hamilton in their progression? I'm scared to say this, but I'm going to stick with the Red Blacks at home and covering the spread. I may live to regret.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio. Worth watching.